All right, thank you, Rebecca. So we're going to start with the first half of our presentation today. So we're going to cover a little bit of ground related to indigenous local movements. And also we're going to talk about social justice in the context of the juvenile justice system. And I will be talking about globalization and the social movements worldwide with two cases that I'm going to present to you. But the first person I would like to introduce, who is Geneva Shaw, who's going to be talking about indigenous communities here. So let's welcome our lecturer, Geneva Shaw.
Good afternoon. Hi guys, good to see you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity just to share a little bit of local indigenous perspective and just a little bit of context. Again, my name is Geneva Shaw, and I am an enrolled member of the Hoopa Valley tribe. However, I was raised Karuk, and that's how I identify from a cultural native knowledge-based perspective. I'm also a descendant of Yurok peoples and also a descendant of Apache peoples on my father's side. So again, just a little bit of context before I begin, and what I'm going to offer you today is really perspective and knowledge from my own upbringing. So knowledge from my own elders who received knowledge from their elders who received knowledge from their elders. So I'm not necessarily representing a generalized group of peoples or perspectives, but really here in representation of my own native knowledge base and upbringing. So with that, I think it's always very important to make that acknowledgement of place and where we are and whose people's lands that we reside on. So again, I appreciate Jessica and William partnering and presenting that, honoring in that context, because I think it really kind of sets the stage for us today. And what I would like to share, and before I do so, I tend to be a little long-winded, so I just want to have my friends over here kind of keep me in check in terms of time. But what I would like to offer is just a little bit of perspective within the context of time and place, which from an indigenous perspective, I don't think we can necessarily separate the two. But we're on the eve of, or the post equinox here, and this time of year, like all times of year, have a lot of significance. But I want to provide a little bit of just overview of the significance of the time that we're in right now. So we're at this place where the sap in the maple trees are running, and the first salmon are starting to make their journey upstream and upriver. And locally, this time has a lot of significance, in that we're also preparing for the return of the spirit of the Seven Sisters. Those of you who aren't familiar with the Seven Sisters, you may know them otherwise as the Pleiades stars or the Little Dipper. And the Little Dipper, the Seven Sisters rather, they journey around the world 10 times a year, dancing around the world. And you can see them in the northern hemisphere skies for 10 months out of the year. And for those other 2 months out of the year, they journey back to this physical world that we reside in. And they come and they are present in what we would call the people's dances for 2 months out of the year. And those are known as the flower dance, as well as the brush dance ceremonies. The Seven Sisters, we're preparing for the Seven Sisters in my spiritual family to return to this physical place and this physical earth. And specifically, we're preparing for their return in celebration of the young women who have come of age. So what I mean by come of age is that we're preparing to celebrate the first menstruation of many of our local young ladies. And historically, that's done in a very kind of public celebration form, if you will, where people come together to make luck for these young ladies. And every spring, the first flower dance ceremony that we hold is really in recognition, the flower dance in recognition of the return of that spirit being, that sister who represents the flower dance. And those seven sisters also represent essentially our role as Native women and what that means. And they symbolize all that is good. And they symbolize and also kind of provide a formula, if you will, for the role of women in ceremony. So before we start many of our other ceremonies that occur during the summer and into the late summer and even early fall months, the first ceremony that we hold is the salmon ceremony, or recognition of return of the salmon. And then 10 days beyond that is the commencement of the flower dance, which is to honor the return of the spirit of that sister. So I would bring this to share with you all because this is a journey and a social movement that I've been on for approximately 25 years now, although I didn't realize it at the time. So approximately 25 years ago, there was a woman who decided that she wanted to bring back this ceremony to honor our young women who come of age. Because due to invasion and colonization and the targeted annihilation efforts and the roles of our local women, the flower dance ceremony went dormant for approximately 80 to 100 years, or several generations. And this was as a result of the deliberate act of genocide and colonization and erosion of the traditional roles of Native women in our California societies, and specifically I'm talking here locally. So this woman, 25 years ago, in partnership with many of the people that she had as a part of her life and her spiritual family, embarked on a journey to revitalize this ceremony for the Karuk peoples. And she did so in preparation for her own daughter, who would be coming of age, in a few years. And that young girl at the time was me. And so my mother was very instrumental in kind of the revitalization efforts of our local women's coming of age ceremony for the Karuk peoples. So as a result, I've been on this journey now for, again, that started approximately 25 years ago, and approximately maybe like 17 years ago, we had, my ceremony. And now as a result, I've been a part of this social movement and grassroots effort to reclaim our role as women and what that means, and celebrating that role and acknowledging the integral role that we played and the gender equality in our traditional societies, and giving back to our community in a way that honors now young women who come after me. So that's where, some of our kind of local efforts are at right now, are in preparation to celebrate our young women who have come of age, during the past year and months, and to publicly celebrate them, honor them, make luck for their lives, and give them a foundation that will take them throughout their life, knowing their place, their responsibility, their worth, and how they fit into the greater kind of balance and context of community. And this has residual effects as well, not just for our young women, but for her mother, her sisters, her father, her brothers, her aunts, her uncles, her grandparents, who also learn how to care for her, how to support her, how to maintain a sense of balance in her role and the role around her. So I'm here today to just share with you that acknowledgement of the grassroots social movements around reclaiming our role as women and celebrating who we are and supporting gender equality and empowerment. Because traditionally, our women were the decision makers and were the bosses. And even today, behind every great man, you will find a great woman. And I don't mean behind in that they're less than or unequal, but really, she serves as the foundation for her family and her partnerships. So as a deliberate act of decolonization, we have to wrap around our ladies and our women and rise up. So with that, I would like to share with you also a song, which is the Song of the Seven Sisters. And this is my tribute to the daughters, the mothers, the aunts, the grandmothers, who are in this process of preparing to publicly come together and make luck for their ladies. Those who are already a part of this movement and those who have yet to become a part of this movement. Because for me, and where I come from, ceremonial revitalization is the ultimate act of decolonization. And this is a movement that's not just occurring here locally, but throughout the world. And I'm forever blessed and grateful to be a part of it, because it very much has made me who I am today. So with that, here's the Song of the Seven Sisters. No, any, 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 no, any. No, any, 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 no, any. Thank you.
Well, that was powerful. Next, we have one of our own, Rebecca Ramos, who's going to present on the juvenile justice system. Rebecca?
A little small. Can you hear me? Yes? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the school-to-prison pipeline and then cover a little about restorative justice and how important it is in our current juvenile justice system. So as many scholars refer to the school-to-prison pipeline, it's a set of policies and practices that have been set in place in the majority of our public schools all across the country. And these policies and practices, what they do is sort of push out many of our students out of the classrooms and into the criminal justice system. And policies such as the zero tolerance policies that, sorry, I'm a little nervous. The zero tolerance policies that provide very punitive punishments to students for crimes that should be considered more like minor infractions, such as disruptive behavior or truancy, or such as bringing scissors or nail clippers to school. Students have been suspended and expelled, and a lot of school arrests have been happening all over the country. I believe ever since zero tolerance policies have been implemented in our schools, the rates of suspension and expulsion have tripled up to 3.1 million students in the year of 2000. And also, besides the zero tolerance policies, there's been a lot of policing in our schools, so a lot of policing in our hallways, outside of the schools. There's a lot of canine units with their dogs searching schools and searching students for any type of paraphernalia that they might be carrying, as well as random searches in classrooms, just stopping the classrooms and stopping the teachers from teaching and just searching students. And with that, with those actions that they're doing, it's pushing the students out of the classroom and into the jail systems. So some alternatives to the school-to-prison pipeline would be a restorative justice approach. A lot of schools have implemented these type of programs. Restorative justice came about 30 years ago, And many schools across the country and other countries have been implementing these type of programs in order to challenge the current system that we have. And the restorative justice approach is more of a solution-based approach where students that are involved in any crimes are allowed to tell their stories, and not just the offenders, but as well as the victims and families of the victims and families of the offenders. And they're allowed to repair the harm that was committed, as well as rebuild the trust and the relationships within that space and with the community as a whole. And one restorative justice approach that's been happening here locally is the Humboldt County Teen Court, which is a diversion program that's in collaboration with the Arcata Police Department, as well as the probation department and local schools. And they work together to offer first-time offenders a chance to restore justice to themselves and the people that they committed harm against. And the teen court is made up of all teens, the jury, the judge, everyone's there. They're all youth, and they're all working together, and they come up with a plan as to what the juvenile can do, such as community service or being a part of Big Brother Big Sisters, anything really that involves the youth in giving back to the community and holding them accountable for their actions. Another approach has been the restorative justice for Oakland youth in the Oakland Unified School District. It has been implemented in over 20 schools in the Oakland area, and what's happening there too is teachers are creating healing circles or talking circles for youth who have been also in trouble for having like altercations with other students or talking back to their teachers or not attending school. They're providing these circles in which the students can talk to each other and relate to one another and share their stories, and again reinforcing that repairing the harm and rebuilding trust and relationships with the campus community and then the community as a whole. Let's see. And I guess just I'd like to just reinforce that we as social workers and as community members and everyone really, any community members, we're all accountable for what we can do in our communities and how we can advocate for programs such as these, especially AOD counseling and mental health services, because they're not really available for students if they've been involved in the juvenile justice system or the regional facility here. There's not many programs that can rehabilitate our youth. And we should definitely reclaim our social work profession, because according to the National Association of Social Workers, I believe it's only less than 2% of social workers are actually employed in the corrections department or probation department, because it's been so overwhelmingly law enforcement. So we have to take back our profession and definitely rehabilitate our youth, because we're not trying to correct them, we're not trying to fix them, we want to rehabilitate them and restore some justice in them. And that's pretty much it. I hope you just take away a little bit about the realities about the school to prison pipeline. I know some of us may or may not know what it really is, or it's very triggering for some of us, but I just definitely encourage you to challenge yourselves and research about it and talk to colleagues and to other people that you may know about the school to prison pipeline, because it's very real, as well as how important it is for restorative justice to be implemented in schools and in the courts and in the juvenile halls. And yeah, I really want to emphasize how we as social workers must reclaim back our role as rehabilitators, because that's what we have been in the past, and I believe that's been diminishing over the past few years, and we should reclaim that. And that's it.
All right, it's my turn now to present to you. And as some of my students know, I can go on and on and on. But I'm going to time myself so I don't go on and on and on. A little bit about myself. I'm a community practitioner. I'm a scholar, activist. I make very clear through my teaching and through my work, my politics, and having this colloquium is part of that. It's an extension of my academic work and my research work, but also an extension of my critical thinking. And I want you to move into that direction of thinking of us as critical thinkers as we engage into these practitioners' perspective into macro-social work. The selection of the macro-social work theme wasn't intentional. I wanted to make salient our ability to understand and make connections, historical and contemporary, about social movements, about community organizing, and about the role of social change that we need to assume as social workers. So micro-practice has been a vital and essential part of social work, and continues to be a transformational experience, not only for us as social workers, also for individuals that we interact with. That transformation happens in a collective way. It happens in a two-way street with the communities that we work on. We engage in this particular work as a labor of love, because we believe that social work is about transforming ourselves and others. So for me, talking about social justice and economic justice and talking about transformation means to fight oppression and suffering and poverty that we experience in this country and around the world. So with a grassroots community organizing, one of the many manifestations of macro-practice, we transform ourselves collectively, building interpersonal relationships. And that's something that I continue to remind all of you, that social work is about interpersonal relationships. That is what it's all about. And although we have new technologies that help us to communicate with one another, it will never replace the human interactions of people meeting face to face. And that's a very important element of macro-social work. People believe that macro-social work is about protests and going to the streets, and it's part of that, but it's also building relationship with one another and trusting one another and coming together and decide what kind of transformation we're going to have for our society. So community grassroots organizing really allows us to think about different ways in which theory can inform this transformation. I'm not going to go on into the different theories that support our work, but one of the main ones that I think is important is critical social work, right? Thinking about engaging our communities, individuals that we work with, in a way that we allow them to speak for themselves, right? We as a social workers tend to have that kind of a role, because it's very institutionalized, that we speak for others. And my invitation to you today is to transform that relationship to allow others to speak for themselves, because people need to have their own voices, and that's part of what we're here today, to talk about how we can then facilitate that transformation where we are moving ourselves from being the experts to allow our individuals and our communities that are working with us to become the experts and have the ability to speak for themselves. So grassroots community organizing is something that I've been practicing for a long, long time. I've been doing grassroots community organizing in California, in New Mexico, and in Massachusetts. And I'm very, very proud of the work that I've been doing and all the people that I have been collaborating with. And for me, what it comes down to it is our ability to transform ourselves through this process. And I know that in my lifetime, I won't be able to see that transformation. I won't be able to see the fruit of the labor that I'm investing now working in the communities that I work with. But that's part of the hope that we have as practitioners in social work, that transformation that we want to seek, we might not see it in our lifetime. And that's what we really strive to look into, the impact that we have in our regular practice, particularly dealing with communities who have been silenced and oppressed for many, many years. So, for me, global social movements really encapsulate the whole effort that we have of fighting invisibility. Fighting invisibility and fighting the fact that we are invisible for a lot of communities that make decisions for us, whether it's policymakers, whether it's economies, whether are people with corporations and international institutions. The idea is that we have a way to fight back, and we have a way to come together collectively and let our voice heard whenever there's a situation where we feel that we've been oppressed. So the first case that I want to talk to you about is going to be the anti-globalization movement. But first, I wanted to tell you about social movements about mobilization. And mobilization is not about just taking off the street, because that's just one manifestation of a social movement. That also means strengthening the relationships that people have. It's also building organizations that are accountable to each other and to the communities that they serve. And also social movements are about to really make visible what is invisible and opening the discourse about some of the manifestations of oppression that happens in our communities. So social movements are really telling us a story about how people organize, how they trust one another, they come together to fight oppression, and how part of the liberation process is to really do it collectively. And that's one of the most powerful things that could happen to us as social workers, is when we come collectively as a group with our communities that we serve, and we transform ourselves as we're transforming others. So the first movement that I want to talk to you about is the anti-globalization movement. And I selected this particular case because this was a great momentum where we're fighting against globalization. So we're having the different international trade agreements happening, one here in North America, the North America Free Trade Agreement, and people are starting to realize that a lot of the decision-making that were happening and impacting the individuals in these countries were happening somewhere else. They were not being consulted. They were not being asked about what transformation they wanted to have in their societies. They were being making it for them. The biggest one, obviously, being the fact that a lot of the jobs were started losing manufacturing jobs in the United States, moving to the South in countries like Mexico, or bringing to Asia, particularly China. So the idea is that the anti-globalization movement started to galvanize this opposition to this global movement of having people fighting for their rights at the global scale. So one of the biggest things that happened with the anti-globalization movement was that it started to be an organized movement articulated across international borders, not only in North America, but also in Europe. Some of the pictures of what happened. The second movement that I would like to talk about is the Arab Spring movement, because that's definitely something that's contemporary to us, and something that really make visible the ability of Arab people to make their own choices. We have in the United States, after 9/11, have kind of a constructed the other as the Arabs, as the terrorists who are under the suspicion of attacking us, and not really realizing that the democracy that we tried to sell to these countries was just a smoke and mirror situation. People really wanted to have their own emancipation and autonomy and making decisions on their own. So the ability for them to really uprise and fight these regimes, a lot of those regimes being supported by the United States and foreign policy. Again, the idea that social media play a role in this organization and this movement is vital. But again, it couldn't happen without, the basic and vital relationship that people start building with one another and realizing that they were together in this and they wanted to transform their societies. So in sum, what I want you to talk about, I want you to take from this short talk is for you to think about how we have power in numbers and how that disparity, that lack of power that we have can be really transformed by coming together collectively. And this is very, very important. The other thing is that social work has traditionally been with oppressed communities, and we continue to do that, and I want you to continue to reaffirm that commitment that we have about macro practice and particularly community organizing as part of our practice in social work and part of our integral part to transform ourselves and bring about social change. So I think I went over my time. Typical. All right. So I just want to introduce a mentor of mine, professor of mine from Boston University, who's a keynote speaker. And I just wanted to let you know that we're going to have Q&A after we finish the program at 2 o'clock. For some of you who wants to stay and do a little Q&A with the panelists, I invite you for you to stay at 2 o'clock. So when I was doing my doctoral program in Boston University, Lee Staples was one of those people that really inspired me and realized that I had a place in academia because I was lost in my first year of doctoral program thinking, I'm really not cut for this. I don't think I can make it. And really, Lee made a great contribution to my dissertation and to my ability to be able to graduate, and I cannot thank him enough. So Dr. Lee Staples is a clinical professor emeritus of Boston University School of Social Work. He received his MSW of the University of California, Los Angeles, and his PhD in social work and sociology from Boston University. His professional career includes extensive experience in as a community organizer, supervisor, staff director, trainer, consultant, and coach and educator. His keynote title is Graduate Organizing for Social and Economic Justice. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my mentor and Professor Lee Staples.
Thank you, Cesar. It's good to see the sun here. I've come in from Boston. We got 100 inches of snow. The Red Sox are opening up, fortunately, on the road because the snow and the cold is everywhere. But I did see a red-winged blackbird yesterday, so that's a good sign. I could go on and on and on. So the biggest challenge is going to be time, and hopefully I get some cues in terms of when I'm going over. I'm defining community organizing as essentially community members drawing on three critical components: the strength of numbers, which Cesar just talked about, participatory processes, so very much bottom-up democratic processes within those organizations, and also vis-a-vis society. Indigenous leadership, it's interesting, obviously I'm from the East Coast, I'm using the word indigenous, essentially meaning internal leadership. The notion is that the folks who are organizing have the right, the need, and the ability to speak for themselves. Organizing is really different than advocacy, where you have experts who speak for the community on their behalf, the basic assumption being that they cannot speak for themselves. In organizing, it's really not about doing things for people or to people, it's doing things with people as a community organizer and facilitating that change so that the leadership comes from within the group and people are acting on their own behalf. There he goes. I'm also technologically challenged. I'm going to frame the discussion basically by laying out two approaches to community organizing: community development and social action, and then 6 arenas in which it takes place. And I'll provide examples from my own practice and my own work over the years, which goes back to 1968. So as we say in Boston, I'm wicked old. And we'll look at that, and then I'll also talk a little bit about some really exciting coalition work that's going on, and I'll close up with some predictions in terms of trends, future trends that we can expect to see in community organizing. So the first of the approaches is called community development, and it is essentially a collaborative, consensus-based approach, very constructive, working with decision makers, with institutional decision makers, in a non-adversarial manner. It's strong on self-help. To the extent that you engage with decision makers, it is in a very collaborative manner. So picture, for instance, a vacant lot full of all kinds of junk, and people have been complaining about it for years, and nothing gets done. They write letters, they make phone calls, nothing gets done. Finally, people decide to come together and clean up the lot themselves. Classic example of community development. We see the same thing when youth are coming together now, doing a lot of environmental work, whether they call the green team or the park rangers or whatever. In my work, we're seeing all kinds of youth programs where youth are engaging in environmental justice work. And that starts with community development, gardens and cleanups and so forth. It begins to move into social action. Social action is kind of what many people associate with traditional community organizing. It entails a much more adversarial approach. You are essentially dealing with institutional decision makers and pressuring them to do what they otherwise would not do. They need to stop doing something, they need to do something different in the way that they're currently doing something, or they need to do something new. But there needs to be some kind of a change. There is an assumption that there will be some resistance, and that in order to overcome that resistance, folks need to organize and use their collective power. So when we picture that vacant lot, folks might be saying, well, why should we be cleaning up that vacant lot? We didn't mess it up. On the west side of town, where wealthy folks live, the city makes sure there are no vacant lots like that. Let's demand that our city councilor come out, and we'll give her or him a tour with the media and we will demand that that lot be cleaned up. And let's say that that city councilor doesn't show up. Okay, we're going to get all that stuff together, maybe to look like community development. We're going to clean up the lot ourselves. We're going to throw it in all the junk in a truck. We're going to drive to the councilor's house and dump it on the front lawn, or dump it on the front lawn of City Hall. And I've been involved in those kinds of actions numerous times over the years. That's social action. That's pushing someone to do what they otherwise would not do. I'm going to clear my throat. So when we look at the similarities and differences between social action and community development, both are drawing on people power. Both are dealing with participatory processes. Both are dealing with that internal leadership from the community. But in community development, we're really looking at the power to do something, the power to clean up that lot, the power to plant a community garden, the power to develop some kind of a youth program, the power to work for rehab of abandoned houses, the power to develop more affordable housing. When we look at social action, we're talking about changing the relationship between community members who are organized and decision makers. And so in that situation, we're talking about things like changing police-community relations, changing relations between tenants and a slumlord, changing relations between folks who have got homeowners who have got mortgages and lenders and banks, changing relations between community members and corporate polluters, and that's social action. They're not mutually exclusive. We shouldn't look at them as completely dichotomized. The example I just gave of cleaning up the lot and dumping it is an example of using both approaches. Much of the work that I do and many of the examples I'm going to go through shortly incorporate both approaches, and they're both about community organizing. Well, as you can see, I'm still technologically challenged here. 6 arenas. Organizing takes place in a range of ways. The traditional manner that we think of is a piece of turf, a piece of geography. So organization of the South Side, or Coalition for a Better Acre, whatever it may be. Basically, you've got a piece of turf. Everyone who lives in that area is eligible to be a member of that organization. And folks come together to improve their neighborhood, to improve the conditions that are there. And that's turf-based organizing, and I'll give some examples of that shortly. Faith-based organizing, this grows out of the traditional models. Many of you have heard of Saul Alinsky, the famous organizer, started in the back of the yards neighborhood in Chicago, and brought together essentially a coalition, an organization of pre-existing organizations, church congregations being central to that, also labor organizations, neighborhood associations, and so forth. I understand that PICO is getting active in the area, and PICO is also utilizing a congregation-based model, and I'll talk about some of the work that they're doing in the greater Boston area. A third type is interest or issue-based organizing. And here we're talking about organizing not necessarily in one geographic area, but across turf for environmental justice, for tax reform, for health care, food justice, affordable housing, a range of things. The focus is on the issue, not on the locus. Identity. Identity organizing would be by race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. We've seen an explosion of identity organizing over the last 20 years or so. The earliest forms of community organizing were pretty much turf-based and faith-based. A big explosion of identity organizing. One of the major reasons being that most of those turf and faith-based organizations have not sufficiently addressed the issues of folks who are being discriminated against and dealing with issues related to their basic identity. Add to that physical and mental disabilities as well. Shared experience would be a fifth way of kind of organizing the way things get done. Here we're talking about folks who might be living together in public housing. They might be immigrants and experiencing that. They might be homeless for some period of time. They might have just been foreclosed in their property. They might be students. I actually put in this category by age because age is transitioning. So when we look at youth organizing, and there's been an explosion of youth organizing, shared experience, and also senior action and elderly rights. Last of all, work-related, and when we talk about work-related, not talking about labor unions, but talking about organizing that is around issues related to work. We just had a hugely successful campaign to raise the minimum wage in Massachusetts. Youth summer jobs is an employment-related issue, but not in the bailiwick of labor unions. Immigrant worker centers have sprung up around the country, and we're seeing immigrant workers who are not necessarily eligible and certainly not organized by mainstream labor unions, dealing with issues of back wages, not being paid overtime pay, dealing with unbelievably harsh working conditions, and those immigrant worker centers have been organizing around that. I'm involved in the Fight for $15, which is fast food workers. We're going to be having a major action on Tuesday the 14th of April with hopefully about 1,000 people. These are McDonald's workers and Dunkin' Donuts and Burger King and Popeyes and so forth. You might have seen in the paper yesterday, McDonald's came up with a paltry $1 raise, which will cover 5% of their workers. Not enough. So that movement is continuing. And obviously these lines blur, so you might be sitting there saying, well, wait a minute, so what about an elderly person living in a development? Is that turf? Is that shared experience or whatever? What about youth who are organizing for summer jobs? So these arenas cross one another, but I think they are useful dimensions to think of as you really think more analytically about what kind of organizing is taking place, what's working, what's not working. Let me give you some examples on turf. The Southwest Boston Community Development Corporation, Patricia Alvarez is one of our graduates. She's a longtime community organizer. We work together in public housing. She's now overseeing the Green Team. And these are youth who are doing environmental justice work and some of the traditional things of cleaning up the neighborhood and working with businesses to raise awareness. They have come up with a very interesting thing of bringing in goats to deal with some vacant land, which is full of poison ivy, and you don't want to be trying to clean that stuff up before the goats get in there. And it's interesting. It's been in all the local papers. It was on the weather station and so forth. They've gotten quite a bit of publicity around it, and it's also been a real community building kind of phenomena. People have come out to pet the goats and name the goats, and they get a piece of metal in their claw to help take it out and so on and so forth. So folks have gotten more involved, and it's raised awareness. So much of community organizing is raising awareness of injustice, whatever that may be, building relationships among people that you are not alone, that what you are experiencing as an individual problem is shared by others as a collective problem, and that you can do something about it. Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. I'm wondering how many of you here have heard of DS&I? At least one person. It's a very well-known effort. There's a book about it called Streets of Hope. There are 2 documentaries. One is called Holding Ground. One is called Gaining Ground. I encourage you to check those out. This was the most disinvested community in the city of Boston, low-income community of color, massive arson for profit there, and vacant homes, high rates of crime, etc. The community came together and organized, and actually were able to get from the city of Boston the power of eminent domain, which normally eminent domain is something that only governments have to put in a highway or whatever. They got that power of eminent domain to essentially get control of some of these vacant lots, and they did that through social action, and then once they got control of that parcel of land, they were able to do community development and start building affordable housing. So they combined social action and community development. It's a very inspiring story. Check out the book, check out the videos. I've done a lot of work in the Balkans. I've been eight times overseas since the war, working with NGOs, predominantly in Croatia and Bosnia. One story, and I never pronounced this well, Hrvatska Strana, is a small rural area, and there's a river runs right through. On one side of the river is essentially a Croat community. On the other side is a Serb community. These were folks who were killing one another. During the war, the infrastructure was destroyed. The bridge was destroyed across the river. That wound up being a problem for people on both sides, trying to get to market, trying to get to school, to hospitals, and so on and so forth. Folks still did not like one another, but realized that they had a common self-interest in building that bridge, and it makes a nice symbol. And they actually came together. The government was of no use because they didn't have the resources or the will at that point in time to do anything. Came together and built the bridge themselves from both sides, and it's a classic case of community development. When I was doing that work, social action was not something that was going to be smiled on in Croatia. They would shoot you for doing that. So it was kind of a no-brainer. You don't do social action, but you can do community development. And that was very successful. Fenway, where the Red Sox play, Fenway Park is located in a neighborhood. There is a community development corporation there, and they've done some social action with the Red Sox, making sure they're better neighbors, but they've done a lot of rebuilding of affordable housing. And they've conceptualized this as an urban village, and they have a real plan. A big part of organizing is envisioning change and then creating a process whereby people can plan for their own future, set those goals, and develop strategies to achieve those goals. And so they've made great strides moving towards that urban village. Quickly, some examples of social action around Turf ACE, which is in Roxbury, traditionally the African-American community in Boston. An asphalt plant was sited there, and manufacturing this stuff. You can imagine the stench. This is the stuff that you put down on the roads to patch up the potholes and so forth. Social action was done to stop that. Social action was done to stop buses in the public transportation terminal from idling within 1,000 feet of a school and diesel fumes. Coalition for a Better Acre in Lowell. in Old Milltown, there were these old canals up there which had essentially gone dormant, and the city had walked away from them. CBA did a massive social action campaign, forced the city to the table, got agreement to rehab that, and then engaged in community development. And there's actually now, Lowell, I believe, is the only city in the country that now essentially has an urban national park. And that includes part of that canal area. I'll speed up. Watch is Waltham Alliance to Create Housing. I did a lot of work there. It's an old industrial town just next to Boston. I do a lot of my work in a city called Chelsea. Cesar knows it well. It's the poorest community in Massachusetts, about 55% Latino with other immigrant groups. There was a proposal there to build a diesel power plant within 1,500 feet of an elementary school. And ironically, the company that was doing this was Cape Wind, folks that wanted to put windmills out in Nantucket Sound and so forth, and we're getting all kinds of awards from environmentalists as being very, very aware and very green and so forth. But here in a low-income community of color, they're talking about putting a diesel power plant. And it was a long and involved campaign that went over the course of 3 or 4 years, culminating actually at Boston University, where I work. And the president, the CEO of the company, was getting an award, as he's an alum of Boston University, was getting a big fancy award. And we brought in 3 bus loads of very angry folks from Chelsea, went up the back stairs, up into the balcony, unfurled a big banner, environmental hypocrite, passed out leaflets in the crowd and so forth. And, that was thoroughly embarrassing. And within a month of that, after a 4-year struggle, they withdrew their application for this power plant. Faith-based, I'm not going to have time to go through these many examples, but United Interfaith Action down in New Bedford, where I grew up, working on things like after school, extending library hours, childcare, community policing. In Worcester, which is the 2nd largest city in New England, Worcester Interfaith, working on park stewardship. Constructive, collaborative efforts that involve people and really are getting things done. But then you have also coming out of the faith-based tradition, much more adversarial social action. Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, which is out of the Industrial Areas Foundation, the traditional Alinsky network, successfully won a statewide affordable housing trust. This is money the state puts in to create and preserve affordable housing. ECHO up on the North Shore, which is the Essex County Community Organization, working on youth violence prevention and securing funds for that. MCAN, which is the PICO organization, stands for Massachusetts Community Action Network, has been doing all kinds of work around immigration reform and just headed up this major campaign to raise successfully the minimum wage in the state. It would help to turn it the right way. Mill Creek is a marshy area in the city of Chelsea. Even though this is a very densely packed, it's about the most densely populated city in the state, nevertheless, there is marshland because it's surrounded by water on 3 sides. And a very classic community development effort, which took a couple of years, involved a lot of youth going out cleaning up these invasive plant species that had taken over this marshland and essentially made it useless, created an urban wild there. And they now, right in the city of Chelsea, You can do canoe trips. You can do kayaks every year. We have a big festival in the summer and close off the city. There's races, there's environmental tours and so forth. Classic community development. The youth also were involved in creating a year-round ice skating rink. It's not really ice, it's some kind of substance, and a good substance. And it's really neat. It's really neat for these inner city youth to be doing ice skating out there in August. Vida Urbana, City Life, doing some amazing work on stopping foreclosures, stopping auctions, where foreclosed folks have been essentially forced for their homes, physically blocking some of these evictions, physically stopping auctions where folks' housing has been going up, and renegotiating the terms whereby people can repay and get caught up on those loans and successfully do that. They have now branched out to create the Greater Boston Metropolitan Network, which is linking with all kinds of different groups around foreclosure prevention and stopping predatory lending. If I had more time, I'd get into the bomb train campaign, which I'm very enthused about. There's a proposal to bring in these trains loaded with ethanol, going through all these urban areas and putting them in a facility which would be located near a casino, which is going to be built soon. It's a very high-profile campaign. It's ongoing. So far, so good. There's been a moratorium on it, but the fight goes on for that. Identity. I'm doing a lot of work in Boston with the Ethiopian community. There's a high rate of suicide among Ethiopian youth. Community development there has been very much around dealing with the stigma of mental health, which we see a lot, certainly in the East Coast with immigrant groups, and how to deal with that. At the same time, the group has developed a Saturday program to teach the Amharic language to youth, a parents program, community forums on April, now I get my dates mixed up, I think it's the 29th, we'll be holding a community forum. Those are usually attended by over 100 people. The Shanbaro Association, also in Chelsea, this is Somali Bantu, as distinguished from Somali, a totally different language, a nomadic group that has been enslaved in Somalia for hundreds of years. Really a community development effort to get basic services, translation in the hospital, translation in the schools, more culturally competent programs, and a program for girls, young girls and girls' development, a very patriarchal society, and how to kind of deal with that in a culturally sensitive way, obviously with the leadership of the community involved. Identity issues around social action, obviously same-sex marriage, which we see all across the country. One of our graduates, Carly Burton, has been a major player with Mass Equality. Empower, Massachusetts People Organized for Wellness, Empowerment, and Rights. I began organizing deinstitutionalized mental health consumers when I was out at UCLA in the early 70s, and have stayed with that over the years. In Massachusetts, this organization has been successful getting a mental patient's Bill of Rights, successful in dealing with the abuses that happen with forced restraints when staff who are undertrained and oftentimes very scared and not properly supported themselves panic and throw someone into these 5-point restraints, 4-point restraints. People left in their own feces for days. 5 people had died while in restraints. Got the reform now that as part of the training of new staff for the Department of Mental Health, they have to be put in restraints themselves and to experience that and to become sensitized to that and to use it only as a very last resort. RAP, the Ride Advocacy Project. This is for people with physical disabilities. We have public transportation, the MBTA, and the vans pick you up, take you to the doctors, to employment, and so forth. Too long to get into it, but there were a lot of problems with the vans not arriving on time, people left out standing on a corner in the cold and rain, disabled people, dropped off at the wrong place, not picked up, et cetera, et cetera. A very feisty campaign. Actually, one of our professors at Boston University, who herself has a disability, was one of the leaders of that campaign, and they were successful. I brought yesterday's Boston Globe. You see the front page story about Chinatown. The Chinese Progressive Association, which is involved in 101 different issues, but one of their biggest is stabilization of the neighborhood. They will be holding a march this coming Tuesday. The Chinatown is located, as it so often is in urban areas, right downtown, and big developers are trying to encroach on that, and it's essentially a defensive battle to hang on to that land and to respect that land and stop development there. Minutes, good. Once in a while I get the right slide up, but bear with me. Shared experience. We had a wonderful program. They lasted for about a dozen years that involved BU School of Social Work students in a pretty significant way. The Boston Housing Authority, because of corruption and mismanagement, was put into a court-ordered receivership, which lasted for, I think it was 11 years, a result of a class action lawsuit. And we were able to secure a grant for funds to come in. I supervised a student unit of folks who did their fieldwork placements either second year, but more typically second year, first year 2 days a week, or second year 3 days a week, working with this organization that worked on a variety of more community development issues. They were not doing the classic landlord-tenant stuff, but getting vacant basement space rehabilitated so that you could hold recreation programs there, or nutrition classes, or GED classes, or we developed an after-school space and a daycare center, the first daycare center in a public housing development, I think, in the country, and we had people from all over coming in to look at that. Many of those students went on to be employed by the Committee for Boston Public Housing, and a number of them are still doing. I just mentioned Patricia Alvarez. Steve Schnapp works with United for a Fair Economy. Jeff Wilkinson was executive director of Massachusetts Senior Action Council. I could go on, but a really great feeder for excellent community organizing. Massachusetts Coalition for the Homeless. CUDE is Committee United for the Defense of Education, also in Chelsea. This is essentially a Latino parents and students organization, starting with mostly community development, but they've been successful in doing a mapping project to look at resources for youth in the community, did a food survey, trying to get healthy food into the schools and more choices. Were successful in getting a task force set up to deal with bullying in the school, and a series of forums, the first of which is around teen suicide. So they've had great success, essentially in a non-confrontational way, working with the Chelsea schools. The Hyde Square Task Force, again, very much involved with the School of Social Work. It's a field placement. 3 of our alums have been on the staff there. The acting director right now, I-Chin Chen, is a School of Social Work alum. They've done some amazing youth work. Some of it is community development. Some of it is social action. They had a major campaign to bring sex education into the Boston school curriculum. Boston School is very much influenced through the Catholic Church and pretty conservative in those curriculum areas. And this lasted for 2 years. They involved city councilors, state representatives, and the mayor, and ultimately were successful in changing that curriculum. They've done a lot of anti-violence work, a lot of work around police, community relations, and profiling, and so forth. Massachusetts Senior Action Council, work around prescription drugs, elderly housing. Canyo Martin Pena, which I've not organized with directly, but have had some involvement of observing. In Puerto Rico, in a really low income area in San Juan, we had a squatting movement, essentially took over this area and physically occupied it and began building houses. And there have been various attempts to bring in clearance so that hotels can be built and upscale apartments, because it's a desirable piece of land. But to date, it's a much longer story, but to date, the effort has been very successful, not only in holding on to the land, but developing all kinds of really good programs, youth programs, and so forth. Work-related in Chelsea, typically, this is something to think about. Typically, you don't mix providing direct services with community organizing. It's a much longer discussion, but something to look at. And part of the challenge being that when people come for services, they're coming to get something. When you're doing organizing, the notion is you have something to contribute and something to bring to the table. But we do run one service program in Chelsea. We provide summer jobs for about 275 youth. These are not youth who are the highest achieving in school. These are the youth who are most likely to fall into gang involvement, of which there is quite a bit in the city. And it's not just jobs, but it's combined with a mentoring program with employers. You work 4 days a week. The fifth day, which they are paid for, there are classes on conflict resolution, dating violence, and sometimes just fun things, going to a water park or whatever. Out of that summer jobs program, we also hire 8 youth organizers who are funded 12 months of the year. And those youth organizers then have gone on, several of them are now adults and on the staff of the Chelsea Collaborative. So it's a feeder. JPNDC, Jamaica Plain, this is an example of combining turf and community development and work-related whole campaign around jobs for Jamaica Plain residents. Took some old vacant factory buildings, and now you've got, I mentioned before, Vida Urbana City Life. They have their offices in there. There are a number of progressive groups in there. Some of you may have drunk Sam Adams beer. Their main brewery is in there. There's a whole range of good things in there. I think breweries are good. Youth Force is a coalition effort to bring together all the youth programs in Massachusetts. Every year in the budget, they will cut the money. There's never enough money in the state budget, same everywhere. So the proposal is to make cuts. And what do you suppose is always near the top of the list? Youth employment, because those youth are not voting. They're typically youth of color, low-income youth. And so it's a fight every year. And this is a coalition effort to essentially have localized accountability sessions with state senators and to get them on board to restore the funds. And that's been successful each and every year for the last 7 years now. I talked about immigrant worker centers. Jobs with Justice is doing campaign with Walmart. I've talked about the fight for $15. Some impressive coalition work. Transgender Equality Rights Coalition. I had a case study written up for my community organizing staff on this. It was a really successful legislative battle to get a piece passed through the legislature. I mentioned the City Life's Greater Boston Metropolitan Network. I do a lot of work with the Massachusetts Clubhouse Coalition, which is another mental health program. One of our alums, Reva Stein, is the executive director, terrific organizer. On 48 hours notice, she can mobilize 700 people at the State House to fight for funds for mental health programs. And she does that regularly. She will be organizing a great event in 2 weeks. It's called the Employment Celebration. Part of this organization is getting jobs for people with mental health disabilities, bringing together state representatives to present an award to employers who have hired mental health consumers. So it's kind of a triple win-win-win photo opportunity, hero opportunity event at the State House in the Hall of Flags. 300-400 people, a lot of media, a terrific event. Raise Up Massachusetts was the minimum wage. ACT is through Healthcare for All. A lot of food justice work going on in Boston. Green justice. The T-Riders, these are folks, shared experience riding public transportation. You may or may not have heard when we had all that snow, they just shut down public transportation for like a week. And there are multiple issues with the T, so riders have organized. The Youth Jobs Coalition. May 1st Coalition is a big day for immigrant rights, marches and so forth. The Chelsea Collaborative, Chinese Progressive Association, there's 10 or 12 different groups that will be mobilizing 2,000 to 3,000 people to march on May Day. Last of all, future trends. I would see, and we're already seeing much of this, that looking ahead, we are going to see more and more organizing around economic justice. Consciousness is certainly raised around this. Elected officials like Elizabeth Warren is certainly raising some of these issues. We've had Occupy. We, for the first time, are talking about the 1% in a more significant way. Environmental justice, alive and well and expanding, not only domestically but worldwide. Community labor coalitions, historically has been sort of separate silos. Unions over here, community organizing over there. Not enough time, but there are many, many examples of community labor coalitions, bringing together labor unions and community organizations to fight for common interests. Immigrant rights, exploding all across the country, all kinds of wonderful work. One that I've not seen manifested yet, elderly rights. One would assume the baby boom generation, my generation, a lot of folks getting old, a lot of folks having been politicized, and we see the assaults already beginning on Medicare, Social Security, and so forth. One would need to predict that there will be more movement there, but I've yet to see it. Use of information technology. I agree with what Cesar said earlier. I see it as a supplement, not a substitute for direct stuff, but as an organizer, you want to use each and every tool that's available, each and every tactic that can help you win. And there's a huge upside to drawing on information technology. And last of all, youth-led organizing. Really, in the last 20 years, we've just seen so much youth-led organizing. I co-authored a book with a colleague, Melvin Delgado, on youth-led community organizing. just looking at this phenomena across the country. And some of the most exciting work, I think, right now is youth-led. And what's so encouraging for me is that most of these youth are not going to do this for a few years and then go off and work in some bank. They are going to be politically active the rest of their lives, and their consciousness has been raised, and that bodes well for the future. I know I'm deeply out of time, so thank you.
On behalf of the Department on Microsocial Work Practitioners, we want to give you a certificate of recognition for all your work and the legacy you are leaving behind, particularly dealing with community organizing and social work. So on behalf of the department, we extend this certificate to you.
Thank you so much.
Sure. All right, how's everybody doing? I see people falling asleep here. Everybody get up, please. Everybody get up. Stretch a little bit. We're getting into the second half of our colloquium, which includes the Alumni Award. So we want to make sure that attention is up here. So you can sit now. Thank you very much. Again, as part of our work of recognizing our alumni, it's part of kind of a bring it back home, the idea that, once you graduate from the program, you continue to be part of this family. So I would like to invite Sherry Johnson, our Director of Field Education, who's going to introduce our recipient of the award for the Academic Colloquium 2015.
I have the privilege of introducing Julie, and I'm actually only standing in for our beloved Title IV coordinator, Ken Smith. So I'm the substitute, but I'm so happy to be able to be his substitute today. Julie Sanchez is an enrolled tribal member of the Pueblo de San Ildefonso in northern New Mexico. She was born and raised in Southern California. For the past 7 years, she has been involved with homeless and tribal youth advocacy. Julie was originally a marine biology major and happened to be in the social work freshman interest group FIG for Social Justice. Through the persistence of Maria Bartlett, sitting back there in the room, now social work faculty emeritus, and a few other professors, she changed her major in 2007 to social work. Fortunately, the volunteer work she was already doing in the community could be counted towards the BASW program requirements. Future internship for her as a BASW student included Two Feathers Native American Family Services and United Indian Health Services Children and Family Services. Julie graduated from HSU in 2010 with her bachelor's degree in social work and a minor in Native American Studies. In the final year of the BASW program, she was awarded the CalSWEC Title IV stipend. This program engaged her with a population she never once considered working with, high-challenged youth and families, those in or at risk for entry into the child welfare system at Redwood Community Action Agency Youth Services Bureau, as well as on the Pueblo. In Julie's own words, after graduation, I had the privilege of working with the Youth Services Bureau as a youth case manager, where I received guidance, supervision, and support to take on a position in New Mexico, a large role working directly for my tribe. I built the Indian Child Welfare Program from the ground up by assisting in rewriting the tribe's law and order codes, coordinating delivery services and federal agents, creating a culturally specific substance abuse program, and advocating for the Pueblo's youth in care across the Southwest. Julie continues, through this experience, I gained a love of administration and leadership. This influenced my decision to attend the University of Washington in Seattle School of Social Work for my MSW, with their concentration on administration and policy. The opportunity to work with my tribe also allowed me to reconnect with my Pueblo's traditional customs and language. Julie is currently in the final quarter of the Advanced Standing MSW program at the University of Washington in Seattle. She is an intern at the City of Seattle's Human Services Development under the Youth Employment Program. She has been an essential part of initiating the Mayor's Youth at Work initiative, which launched this spring and is going to serve over 2,000 of Seattle's low-income, high-barrier youth. Currently, she is also piloting a youth evaluation survey for the program, sitting on numerous task force, all while working and going to school full-time. In the next few months, she will be working with the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute as a graduate research assistant to further guide her love of empirical data and working with American Indian communities. After graduation, she plans to apply for a PhD program and eventually go back to her pueblo to further build her tribal's community Indian child welfare program. Julie concludes by saying, "I will always thank the HSU social work program as well as the CalSWEC stipend program for giving me the direction to become an advocate, a listener, and a tactful fighter for tribal youth in the child welfare system. HSU's social work program instilled in me a strong understanding of social justice, theoretical perspectives, and methodological thinking that has allowed me to flourish as a social worker." On behalf of the Department of Social Work, please join us in welcoming Julie Sanchez, our alumnus of 2015.
Oh, wow. Did I really do all that? I guess so. If you would have told me 10 years ago when I was 17, I was this like punk rock misfit that I would be up here today, I wouldn't believe you. I would not believe you at all, actually. It's great that we're actually talking about community because I spent 7 years here and this was my community for those 7 years. I spent 5 years at HSU. Thanks to Maria, I found my direction as a youth of color. I came here at a very transitional time in my life, and if it wasn't for Maria's direction in those early years, I honestly don't really know where I would be. She means the world to me, and that class just influenced me in so many different ways. Also, I have to thank Ronnie because with his encouragement, almost like push to get me into the CalSWIC program, I would not be involved in the child welfare realm that I am currently in. It's been absolutely incredible, an incredible journey. And for all the bachelor's level social workers, I really encourage you to continue working in your community and to be involved in your community and to make sure that you become engaged with your professors as well as other community partners, because that's really what's going to bring you and further your education and further what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. I have to say kutawoha, which is thank you very much in the Tewa language, because it's overwhelming to me that I'm even here. And to know that, to the 10 years ago, I didn't think I would be here. And, I have such wonderful staff and faculty to thank for that. So once again, kutawoha.
So on behalf of the department, we have a certificate for you, and we also have a plate. So you will be recognized, and your name will be also in part of a plaque that we have on the 5th floor of the BSS building. So your name will be added for 2015. So congratulations, we're very proud of you.
Thank you.
All right, I would like to thank everybody for coming today. That concludes our regular program. We would like to invite people who would like to stay for the Q&A for the panel who presented to stay behind. But on behalf of the department, on behalf of the coordinating committee, we thank you for taking the time to be here with us. We hope to see you next year, 2016. Thank you very much for your participation. And if you haven't participated in our map, please do so. Thank you very much. This is the end of the program. Thank you.